Hey guys, welcome back to the channel where I cover missing persons, unsolved cases, crime news, and more. I've been wanting to do some videos, especially with the now 60th anniversary of the assassination of John F. Kennedy, on the conspiracy, let's put it that way. It's been over 60 years since John F. Kennedy, President Kennedy, was shot and killed in Dealey Plaza in Dallas. Now, the Warren Commission, of course, they ruled it that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone gunman and that Jack Ruby acted alone in killing him. And we've been hearing in recent years, of course, it also came out a couple years after the Warren Commission report, that there is no such thing as a magic bullet. And that, of course, there is much more to the assassination than the Warren Commission said there was. Well, oddly enough, there is still folks out there who believe that the Warren Commission was completely correct and that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone gunman, which blows my mind. But let me I wanted to play this piece here. This is from CBS Sunday Morning, when Walter Cronkite, one of the best journalists ever, in my opinion, announced that JFK was shot, and then later made the awful announcement that he was deceased.
This picture has just been transmitted by wire. It is a picture taken just a moment or two before the incident. If you can zoom in with that camera, we can get a closer look at this picture.
And almost exactly 1 hour after his initial bulletin, this now famous announcement.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
I remember watching that, Walter Cronkite making that announcement. I believe I was in middle school. Of course, this happened before I was even born. I'm going to kind of date myself here, but I'm 45 years old. I was born in 1978. But my father's interest in the Kennedy assassination it was just a part of my life growing up, because he was homesick from school, and as I got older and we were learning about the history in school, I remember this was something that really got my interest, and I remember learning as much as I could about the that day in Dallas, and everything about Lee Harvey Oswald, Jack Ruby, and I know I did at least one report on it, and I was in school. It's something that it's over 60 years ago, but I fear that the current generation may never learn about these kind of things, and this is part of our history. And I think that there's so much of our history that needs to be learned about, not only about in the world, but as far as in this country, in the United States of America. And the assassination of John F. Kennedy is something that, as well as the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., there are certain instances, events, certain historical events that happened that we need to make sure never, they just stay in our history books, I think, in my opinion. And I don't think a lot of the current generations, I don't think they know who JFK is. I could be wrong. But I remember learning about this when I was in school. But I fear there's so many things that these kids now are not learning, and this is definitely something that needs to be maintained in our history. That said, I'm going to have a lot more videos coming up, but I wanted to discuss Dan Abrams had on a panel last week during the 60th anniversary, because News Nation did some amazing coverage, which again I'll be going through a lot of their stuff as well. That's a plethora of John F. Kennedy material, stuff on the assassination. I mean, there's just so much out there. But they did an amazing special about how that the experts are stating that it wasn't just, Oswald in the school book depository building. Of course, that's something that I knew since I was a kid. I looked at all the stuff and I'm like, there's no way. There was definitely someone in that grassy knoll. I believe there's a minimum of 2 shooters, if not more. That said, Dan Abrams did have someone on, a lawyer, last week, and this particular individual still believes in the lone gunman theory. With all the witnesses, with the fact that we've got the Zapruder footage, all this other evidence, and we've learned that there's no such thing as this magic bullet that could have hit JFK and then hit, Senator Connally, and to me, it's just so impossible that Oswald, was anything more than, whether he was just a patsy or he was a part of the entire situation. Yeah, he was involved, but I think Jack Ruby killed him because they knew he was going to talk. He already said he was a patsy. He was going to spill his guts. And they couldn't let that happen. Whether that was our government, CIA, mafia, that I don't know at this point. But it was definitely not just a lone gunman.
Well, I was questioned by a judge. However, I protested at that time that I was not allowed legal representation.
In bringing Oswald out, they were, of course, doing something that you would never see happen today. But they were trying to cooperate with the press with the understanding that there would not be questions shouted at him.
Did you kill the president?
No, I've not been charged with that. In fact, nobody has said that to me yet. The first thing I heard about it was when the newspaper reporters in the hall asked me that question.
You have been.
Nobody said what?
Sir?
You have been.
Nobody said what? Okay, we can't hear you then. Okay.
What did you do in Russia?
So this is the piece that was on last week on Dan Abrams' show. He had a panel on. This is one of the clips here. And a lot of questions for this lawyer who still believes that Lee Harvey Oswald was the assassin of John F. Kennedy.
The new president, Lyndon Johnson, ordered these questions answered.
The President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy, commonly referred to as the Warren Commission, was established 7 days after JFK's assassination. The commission concluded that President Kennedy was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald, that Oswald acted alone. It also concluded that Jack Ruby acted alone when he killed Oswald 2 days later. At first, it was praised. The New York Times called it a comprehensive and convincing account of the circumstances of President Kennedy's assassination. Time magazine saying it put the rumors to rest, writing its great value comes from the thoroughness with which the commission carried out its investigation, from its laying to rest many malignant rumors and speculations, from its fascinating wealth of detail by which future historians can abide. But perception then shifted. 2 years later, in 1966, Mark Lane published a bestseller called Rush to Judgment. The book criticized the commission, claiming interviews with witnesses exposed serious flaws. That same year, New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison launched a much derided investigation of his own, which reported to reveal a vast conspiracy. Oliver Stone would later turn one of his books into the 1991 movie JFK.
It was a rush to judgment. They needed to put blame on someone, and for that, Oswald was the perfect patsy. And then Jack Ruby, perfect. He acted alone. He killed the assassin of our president, and that would give them the perfect way to close the book, allegedly, on this horrific event that murdered an amazing president. Of course, that's not exactly what a lot of folks would agree with. Of course, it would not have become a conspiracy with all these theories, some of which were pretty outrageous, but a lot of them not so much. If Oswald killed the president, and then Jack Ruby acted alone to kill Oswald, gee, that would make it super easy for the Warren Commission to sign, seal, and deliver the perfect closure to this horrific event. And the Times and many, many others bought it. Hook, line, and sinker.
Then Life magazine published frames from the Zapruder film, first in the days after the assassination and then again in the years following. For critics, the graphic home movie of the shooting cast doubt again on the Lone Gunman theory.
And thank goodness for the Zapruder footage. That was amazing. There was so much to that, as well as all these witnesses. And the Warren Commission couldn't answer for that.
Let's bring back our panel. Burt Griffin, former assistant counsel for the Warren Commission, attorney involved in JFK records litigation Mark Zaid, Robert Groden, the author of JFK, The Case for Conspiracy, and investigative reporter and historian Mark Shaw. Burt Griffin, as you look back on the Warren Commission, it seems clear that some agencies were not being totally forthcoming with you when they testified in front of the Warren Commission, like, for example, the CIA. Do you look back now that you know what you know, and say, if we'd had more information, something might have been different?
I don't think anything would have been different. I do think we would have been even more certain that Oswald was the sole shooter. And one of the most important bits of information that was concealed from us was that Oswald, approximately 10 days before he shot President Kennedy, left a threatening note for Special FBI agent James Hosty. And I think that would have been the starting point for our thinking, when is it possible that he might have thought about doing something to President Kennedy? Certainly, I would say no one with any good sense would have left a threatening note for Hosty at a point that he was thinking of assassinating President Kennedy.
I hate to say it, but this guy, his theory, it's not really a theory. His thinking is still so dated. I don't know if he just buys into that report and just is closed-minded to anything else, any other evidence showing that Oswald was not the lone gunman. He was not the only one potentially out there, going after Kennedy. And it just baffles my mind again that here in 2023, this gentleman from the Warren Commission, the original Warren Commission, still believes that Lee Harvey Oswald killed President Kennedy.
Then the question is, what were the important things that were happening in Oswald's life that brought about the assassination? That's a fact that we should have been focusing on, and we did to some extent, but not as thoroughly, I think, as we might have.
So basically, he's saying that because of Oswald's letter, his behavior, that obviously he did it. Granted, we know Oswald was shady. He was a spy. He definitely was involved in some shady stuff. But in my opinion, he was not the lone gunman. He was not the sole shooter that murdered President John F. Kennedy. And finally, there's an author here. This is a author, very intelligent gentleman. His name is Gerald Posner. He also believes that Oswald is the lone gunman.
So you wrote this book in 1993. You conclude that Oswald killed Kennedy on his own. For those who haven't read it, can you share what your basis is for that theory?
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised that I came to that conclusion because I used to think before I started doing the reporting on the book that it was the mafia because Jack Ruby had killed Oswald 2 days after Oswald was arrested. So you get the accused assassin killed by somebody who looks like he's out of central casting for a mafia movie. And of course, you happen to think mafia if you're an investigative journalist. Once you get into it, the overwhelming, credible ballistics evidence, the evidence from the autopsy of the president, the photos and the x-rays, they established that the only shooter in Dealey Plaza that day fired from behind the president in the area where Oswald was last left by 3 of his co-workers half an hour before the assassination. The gun that fired the shots is Oswald's gun to the exclusion of any other in the world. He brought it in that morning disguised as curtain rods wrapped in a brown paper bag. And after the assassination, Oswald flees. He gets a gun from his rooming house, and then he's stopped by a Dallas policeman who he shoots in front of a dozen people on the way to try to flee. So the real hard question is, was he doing it for himself, or was he doing it as part of a conspiracy? And that's always the part that takes the most investigation. I find no evidence that he was doing it for the mob or the CIA or for the Russians or the Cubans. He beat all of them to Kennedy. There were plenty of people that wanted Kennedy dead. There's just no credible evidence that Oswald was working for one of those groups.
Again, this gentleman is very intelligent. I have not yet read his book. Man, there's so many books out about the Kennedy assassination. That said, I don't agree with him at all. I believe they're overlooking a lot of other evidence. Again, the Zapruder footage, the witnesses. To me, I don't believe at all that this was a lone gunman that murdered the president. Do I believe Oswald was a criminal and obviously murdered the officer? Yes. He was a criminal. He was an awful man. But I do not believe he solely killed President Kennedy.
Well, it's certainly fascinating. I'm curious what you make of the other theories swirling all of these years later. Is there one that sticks out to you?
I mean, the one that is the closest that would give you the most difficulty if you were looking at the case as an investigator was Oswald prompted to do it by the Cubans, by Castro, because he had visited the Cuban embassy in Mexico City just 7 weeks before the assassination. Castro knew that John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy were trying to kill him with the CIA and the mafia. And the question was whether Castro struck out first and was able to get Oswald and somehow encourage Oswald to do the assassination. That's the toughest one to deal with. But I must tell you, if you go on the internet today, you'll see old theories that have long since been debunked about shooters from the front, from the grassy knoll, shooters from the sewer, 9 assassins in Dealey Plaza, the fact that Oswald was working for the CIA and he was a secret spy. They get regurgitated all the time. And somehow, no matter how many times, it's like a whack-a-mole game. You knock them down with evidence or credible evidence. They just regurgitate in a new video, or somebody else puts them up on a podcast that goes viral.
So there are still, as we can see, and these are only 2, that believe in the lone gunman theory. I'm definitely not one of them. And I'm curious what you think. Again, I don't know who's right or who's wrong, but I just don't buy it. I don't buy it. And Mr. Posner is saying that they've all been debunked, and by him stating it was Oswald, he is sort of going with the magic bullet theory, because that would have meant that, that one bullet went from Kennedy through to Senator Connally. So again, I don't buy it. The Zapruder footage shows a lot more going on, as well as the witnesses. And to me, I believe it was completely covered up. I don't know if it was the Mafia or the CIA, but it was not just one man. But let me know what you think. And again, I'm going to cover some more on the Kennedy assassination, because it's kind of been one of my, I guess it's a crime, a huge case, conspiracy, whatever you want to call it, a huge event. Let's put it that way. It's a huge event that I've just been following most of my life. And it's been 60 years from the actual event, just over 60 years now, but I don't think, even though we've had all these documents released by the government, I mean, we still have an estimated 320,000 documents have been reviewed at this point, and they're stating that 99% have been released. Now, for some reason, we've got 4,600 that are either kept fully or partially secret. So why is that the case? If we're trying to come full transparency on this, why haven't all the documents been fully released and not redacted in some way? That is the question. But that's all I've got for this one. I hope you have a great rest of the day. And most of all, stay safe.